Hey, beautiful people. So I'm Son Kwang Song. That's the Korean name my grandpa gave me. I was born in Seoul, grew up in New York, member of God's household, citizen of the earth, and speaking to you in English, which is my second language, although it's my most comfortable language now. My mom sang Korean lullabies to me. So when you say mother, I am moved. But when you say 엄마, Korean word for mom, I cry. Corky Lee was an ABC, American-born Chinese, a photographer and an activist for whom art and activism was one and the same, whose camera's eyes gave witness to the nuance and the diverse Asian American stories. And he said this of himself: I'm ABC from NYC, wielding a camera to slay injustice against AAPs. And of course, if he was still alive today, he would have added the I. Now, Corky grew up on the streets of Flushing, where I navigated my own childhood. Ken Jen, another journalist himself, interviewed Corky in a Chinese restaurant in Flushing. And Ken kind of expected Corky to give him a dish, recommend a dish, but Corky turned to Ken and said, "Can you order for me?" And then Corky, reading Ken's slight disappointment, said to him, "Hey, I'm Asian American, so I'm 100% authentically fake." What does it mean to be an AAPI? What does it mean to be American? What does it mean to be an authentic American? In one sense, it is that, right? Authentic American, which has led to the creation of AAPI. So this is what Corky Lee means when he says an Asian American is to be an authentic fake, because Asian American is an identity that was created in response to the fact that Asian Americans were labeled as inauthentic Americans. Erica Lee, the director of History Research Center, wrote a book that traces the diverse histories of Asian Americans, and she titled it The Making of Asian Americans. Now, the term Asian American was coined by activists Yuji Ichioka and Emma G in 1968 to replace the derogative term Oriental that was used then. But it was really a rally call, a radical cross-racial and ethnic solidarity building on the 1960s Black liberation movement. And Pacific Islanders is an expansion of that solidarity with people originally from Pacific Islands, which includes at least 20 distinct people groups. So AIPI is a call to acknowledge our shared histories, our distinct stories, and to fight for collective liberation. But we all know, right? Words get unmoored from its intention. They get co-opted. So when a month is dedicated to AAPI, do we sometimes forget the diversity of stories, the call to liberation? Are we essentializing it, ethnicizing it, as if there's one Asian culture and language? Friends, I do not speak Asianese. I speak Korean, and that not as well as I want to. There is no authentic Asian American. Now, I know in modern culture, there is no greater sin than inauthenticity. I read that in a filtered Instagram post. Be true to yourself. Find your voice. Be authentic. But when authenticity is about authentication, then it's a form of control. It's about who gets in and what you have to do to get in. So in the question of authenticity, it's very important who's asking. Okay, by show of your Zoom hand, tell me who has seen Beef. It's a great Netflix show. How two strangers, right, become mortal enemies through the escalation of uncontrollable rage. I could go on talking about this one, but it's basically two protagonists or antagonists, and they are Asian Americans. Steven Yeun, right, plays Danny, the Korean American construction worker, and Ali Wong plays a wealthy Chinese American florist. Now, in an interview, the interviewer said to Steve Yeun, that he loved the fact that his character Danny was authentic to his Korean heritage, showing Danny meeting his cousin in the Korean restaurant, eating Korean food, 된장찌개. I'm not sure, but that's my favorite. So that's what I smell when I see that scene. And then this authenticity proves true that if you tell your particular story, then you tell the universal story. Stephen replied, that depends who is asking the question. Who is saying, tell your particular story? Because if authenticity is authentication, it's a form of control. Who is asking? Are you the Son of God? Asked the devil. Authenticate yourself by throwing yourself off. If you are the Son of God, said the mockers, come down from the cross. Are you the authentic Messiah? Because we've had so many fakes, and you look like a fake because you don't fit on Messiah mold. Now reading, right? Ephesians 2:11, it says, so then remember that at one time you Gentiles by birth called the uncircumcision by those who are called the circumcision. Who is the authenticator here? The circumcision is the one who calls the others uncircumcision. Well, why do you get to call them that? Because I'm the circumcised. And what exactly is that? The not uncircumcised. Do you get that? The very power for them to call them uncircumcised lies in the fact that they have to make them the uncircumcised. It's all circular, I know. Now, before this authentication, the uncircumcised didn't go around calling themselves the uncircumcised because it wasn't even a matter of identity. It was made just a physical feature of no real significance until it was made an identity by those who needed that negation to define themselves as the circumcised. Again, also circular, I know. But because those who define these identities had the power to make it stick, these mere physical differences became metaphysical, essential, political, and social differences. Words became sticks and stones and bricks and ropes and bullets and redlining and difference of life expectancy. So the Greek word Paul uses here, who are called legomenoi, Paul uses in that exact same form in 1 Corinthians 8:5-6. Even though there may be so-called gods in heaven and on earth, as in fact there are many gods and many lords, yet for us there is one God. Okay, Paul, these so-called gods, are they real or not? Both. They're not real. There's only one God. But when those in power get to call things, they can become real. How? Well, by filling out the definitions for the word they created, derogatory definitions. Did you catch the list of definitions of the uncircumcised? Paul's repeating the rhetoric of the circumcised about the uncircumcised. Well, they are strangers to covenant, no hope, without God, far off, strangers and aliens. Don't those words sound tragically familiar? Don't we have still those hate-filled rhetorics as memes in our culture? Yellow, yellow peril, dirty, heathens, rapists. I don't need to go on. I remember when I was in junior high, we were returning from a Wednesday Bible study to the first house my family bought in Little Neck, New York. But then seeing on our front door a red graffiti hissing, "Go back home, chink." No matter how hard my brothers and I tried to scrape it off, we couldn't erase the trace of those words. These slurs are made into social reality by laws. Laws codify racism, turn words into sticks and stones, and naming into real ID. The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, the first explicitly racist immigration policy. And when President Chester A. Arthur signed it, he said, this will assuage prevalent concerns about maintaining white racial purity. That was the reason. So Erica, the historian, she mentions that Asians were actually the first undocumented immigrants. In 1900s, social deportation agents were named Chinese catchers. In 1920s, they wanted to erect a Chinese wall along the Mexico border. In 1904, there was a Buffalo newspaper story that tells how traffickers were bringing from Canadian border disguised Chinese illegals as Native Americans, quote, dressed in Indian garb and carrying baskets of sassafras. Authentically fake. Takao Ozawa was a Japanese immigrant. He sued to become a citizen of the United States. At that time, the citizenship was only for free white person. And so he challenged the term of free white person. The Supreme Court ruled against him on November 13, 1922. And the justice said, quote, to adopt the color test alone would result in a confused overlapping of races and a gradual merging of one into the other without any practical line of separation. So he said whites should be, quote, confined to persons of Caucasian race. I get to call who's white because I'm white. I know, it's also circular. I'm still often asked when I say I'm from New York, they say, no, where are you really from? Then I answer, you got me. I'm from Narnia. The from question is telling me to be authentic, but who's asking? Remember Ephesians 2? Paul says that Christ is our peace, and he has made both groups into one. He broke down the dividing walls, the hostility between us. He abolished the law with his commandments and ordinances, thus making us into one new humanity. You see, Christ's work on the cross and atonement was breaking down of these dividing walls, abolishing these laws and walls that turn name calling into a social reality. Now, Paul has in mind the great edifice, the temple. In the center of the temple, the Holy of Holies, and which had the most serious authentication process ever, right? If you're not the once a year chosen priest, you die, get dragged out with the rope tied around your waist. In this case, if the bell stops ringing, the soul is lost. And after the holy veil is the holy place and the court of Israel and the court of women. Far out there in the nosebleed section is the court of Gentiles. But the story of Jesus says that when Christ died, the holy veil was torn. And the tearing doesn't mean that not everyone can enter the Holy of Holies, but that the Spirit of God is loose, that the Spirit of God is everywhere, everything, all at once. The words of near and far is now moot, authentication not needed, because Jesus' crucifixion deconstructed the racist and sexist theologies, ideologies, and IDs. In this expansive community, new words are given, like one new humanity, words of belonging. Or, again, Ephesians, so now you Gentiles are no longer strangers and foreigners. You are citizens of God's holy people, members of God's family. Together, we are his house, built together. We are carefully joined together in him, becoming a holy temple for the Lord. Citizens, holy people, members of God's family. You don't, Paul says, you don't have to authenticate yourself in your Microsoft app every 2 days to get into your office. Sorry, that's the wrong sermon there. I meant you don't have to authenticate yourself to get into the temple because you are the temple. Corky Lee knew he wanted to pick up the camera when he was a kid and saw that famous photograph of the completed transcontinental railroad. But in that picture, there were no Chinese, although up to 20,000 Chinese laborers gave their bodies to the national project. That historic picture, purporting to be the authentic story of America, was a fake. So Lee eventually made it to the Parliamentary Summit, recreated Russell's photo with some of the descendants of the same Chinese laborers. It's a fake, but authentic. And he said he recreated it, quote, in an effort to show that Asian American history is American history. So what do? We got to keep dismantling structural racism because that is the work of atonement. Matthew 25 is the Matthew 28 work. And for my siblings who call themselves or who are called white Americans, I say to you, know your history. AAPI history is not just my history, it's your history. And to my AAPI siblings, we have to tell more of our stories and not be ashamed of them. And maybe that last part is really more for myself. Because see, I was taught to be ashamed of my story. The way I was ashamed with my mother, like she would haggle the price of clothing in Macy's, like she was back in Seoul's Namdaemun market. Like no matter how many times I said the sticker price is the final price, she would say, nothing final until I say final. I wish I was more brave and just stood next to her. Grace M. Cho, in a memoir titled Tastes Like War, tells about how she found her way back to her mother through food. The phrase tastes like war is what her mom said when she tasted powdered milk. And it was only later that Grace learned that her mom said it because in the post-war Korea, famished, she scrounged for food in the American military base trash, half-eaten hot dogs, and what she thought was milk, only learning later in America there was powdered milk. So powdered milk brought back the smell and the bitter taste of war. Now, Grace talks about how she had three mothers in her single mother. The first mother was the mother of a childhood. They just immigrated, her mother trying to prove herself American enough to be accepted by the white suburbanites who had already decided. The second mother, the schizophrenic mother, who lost a sense of self, who never left the house, who heard many voices, who spoke in many voices. The third mother emerged when Grace started caring for her and cooking for her. And she writes this: the third mother was the mother of my 30s, who gradually accepted me as a cook and taught me to prepare the dishes my grandmother once cooked for her. And slowly, through eating these foods, she found a way home. Through cooking the foods of a childhood and getting a glimpse into her early life, I found one too. Feeding her brought me closer to her schizophrenia and allowed me to break bread with her voices. I came to understand that the voices were not alien to her, but part of her, perhaps voices from a suppressed and violent family that were searching for a witness. They were probably there all along in the first mother, mute, hungry, lying dormant in her mind, and posed to leave traces of a fractured history in the future. Through the act of communion with her voices, I learned to stop being afraid of them and listen to what they had to say. And all those voices were her voice. Amen.